This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning, Wednesday, August 5th. We are joined today by Dr. Eric Berko. Dr. Berko is here today to talk with us about growing through the experience of social isolation, fear, and anxiety. And we are so glad to have him with us. Dr. Berko has spoken on our monthly Housing Happenings calls in the past, and we really appreciate his insight and his expertise in mental health and wellness, and so glad that he's able to be here with us today. Thank you, Dr. Berko.
You're very welcome. Do you want to give folks a few more minutes, or do you want to go ahead and get started?
I think we can get started. I know we have folks who will probably be joining in a few minutes late, but we've got a good crowd here. I say we go ahead and move on.
All right, let's do it. So these things are hard to do when you don't get to have the interactive conversation. If people have questions, please post them. You can use the chat feature. I'll try to have both windows come up. Allison, if you can monitor that and pipe questions to me as well, I may be a little focused on the rest of the presentation. So my hope is what we do for this hour is we try to gain some perspective on what we're all going through. I'm sure we've all been contemplating and maybe contemplating too much what this all means, but also look at what the psychological literature says about coping with trauma, about resilience, about developing hope. So that hopefully this is a conversation about the positive side and the growth that's possible even during this time. So here's the outline of what we're going to do. We're going to do a little history lesson. Then we're going to go through the stress response and what post-traumatic stress really is. We're going to learn the ABCs, and we are going to practice CBT. In the end, I've made a list of 10 practical take-home tips. So that's the outline. History, what exactly is the stress response, learning the ABCs, practicing CBT, and then take-home tips, hopefully some practical things that you can integrate into your daily life. Okay, history lesson. Does anyone know the top 10 pandemics in history? This is in chronological order, not in the order of catastrophe. Number 1, in the year 165 AD, 5 million people died during the time of the Roman Empire to the Antonine Plague. Yes, this does not sound like a happy, hopeful message, but follow me on this. Number 2, the plague of Justinian in 541 and 542, 25 million people died. This is the bubonic plague. Half of the population of Europe was lost. Number 3, the Black Death, 1346 to 1353, 75 to 200 million people died in the Black Death. This was also another version of the bubonic plague. Number 4, the third cholera pandemic. There were many cholera pandemics. 1852 to 1860, we jumped way ahead in time. 1 million people were lost. The flu pandemic that we've heard so much about, 1889 to 1890, 1 million people died. And the sixth cholera pandemic, 1910 to 1911, 800,000 lives were lost. This was the one that everyone's been talking about, the flu pandemic of 1918. 20 to 50 million people worldwide lost their lives in that pandemic about 100 years ago. There's been 3 others since then. The Asian flu, 1956 to 1958. Many people may have been alive for that one. 2 million folks were lost, and about 70,000 in the US. The flu pandemic of 1968. I don't know if anyone remembers that. 1 million people were lost, and the death rate was about the same as with the current pandemic. And then the last one, you may or may not think of this way, is the HIV and AIDS pandemic. Really started in the late 70s. 2005 to 2012 was the peak until really the advent of the antiretroviral medications. 36 million people. 36 million people. So my point is that in spite of all these tragedies, things have developed and grown and changed in our world. The Industrial Revolution still happened. Shakespeare still wrote all of his works. By the way, most of them while quarantining from pandemics during his lifetime. Revolutions have been fought and won. Social progress has occurred. The world economy has developed. The automobile was invented. The internet was created. Science has progressed with incredible medical miracles, and probably most importantly, Reese's peanut butter cups were invented. Okay, that may be just my own personal thing that I'm happy about. I'm not trying to minimize what we're going through right now, but sometimes context helps. Sometimes history helps. We get lost in this myopic world that this is the most intense thing that's ever happened in the history of humanity. And I'm not minimizing the impact. This is something we all need to be thoughtful and take care of ourselves. At the same time, the broader context of the history of the world has survived these things and has gone on to thrive. So hopefully that helps a little bit. There's some context of history. Okay. The reality now is there is a difficult situation. There are a lot of logistic concerns related to this virus. Childcare, financial uncertainty, caretaking roles, social isolation, shortages of supplies, loss of routine, possibly avoidance strategies that we go to, loss of normal coping, and loss of a lot of these enjoyable activities that we just love and miss so much. And there are emotional consequences that are real. This sense of feeling unsafe. It's unsafe about your health and about society. Questions of what if I get sick? What if someone I love gets sick? Anger, loneliness, uncertainty, being home with family. It can be a positive thing, but it can also raise relationship issues and intimacy issues. If things aren't so great at home, all being stuck together can be a pretty trying situation. Boredom, loss of avoidance strategies, grief, and increased substance use. So those are all reality-based things that can be happening. So let's talk about what the stress reaction really is. What do we do when we're under stress? It is incredibly normal to feel stressed, to feel afraid, and to feel alone. Right? Fear is a normal reaction to uncertainty. You shouldn't be beating yourself over the head because you feel maybe fearful, because the uncertainty bothers you, because you're getting fatigued of the isolation. That stress is a real thing, and it's normal to have what's called a fight or flight response. Right? We talked about this a little bit on a previous call, but the most normal human reaction that any of us have is this fight or flight response. It's our survival instinct. It's there. So if you take away one thing from this, it's the normality of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical pathway. The amygdala fires. And we get this cascade of this hormonal push, this endorphin push through our body that makes certain things happen. Our heart pounds, we breathe more deeply to try to get oxygen in. Blood runs to the muscles in the arms and the legs so we can either fight or run. Our hearing becomes more acute. We're more hypervigilant, and we pay more close attention to everything around us. Our pupils dilate. The blood runs away from our extremities and our hands and our feet so we can get the clammy hands. We may get some stomach upset. We may feel like we need to take a nervous pee. This is that immediate physiological reaction that happens. Now, it's normal and it's helpful when there's an emergency, right? If you're wandering around in the forest and a bear comes upon you, it's really good to have this fight or flight response. Under chronic conditions and chronic stress, this reaction is somewhat unhelpful to us. It's really there to solve a crisis situation, not really good for long-term chronic issues, but our body doesn't know the difference, so it keeps firing all of this. So when we feel afraid, what we do usually is try to resolve the issue immediately and as quickly as we can. We look for these quick, easy answers to help us gain a sense of control and provide this endorphin rush. So let me give you some examples. I'd love for this to be a question and answer for all of you. With questions of job uncertainty, what is a quick, easy fix? Many people do. They eat. And usually eating not fruits and vegetables, but the cake and the cookies and the potato chips and the Reese's cups that were invented in spite of pandemics. Financial uncertainty. What do? We eat. Relationship uncertainty. We eat. Many films have had, and TV shows, people eating ice cream to soothe the soul when a relationship didn't work out or things aren't going well. Health uncertainty. What do? We eat. What about pandemic uncertainty? Has anyone gained some weight? I will raise my hand. I was thinking for that one, the immediate response that I've seen a lot is everybody getting really judgy, having a short fuse, getting mad at everyone and blaming anyone and everything around them that they can. We try to make ourselves feel better quickly. So we need to be careful and we need to watch those things. And we need to remember that there's this thing, it's called a curvilinear relationship between stress and performance. We need anxiety and stress in our lives. We do. We do not perform well if there's no stress at all. Think about school and think about a test, right? I know for my kids at school these days, there's this opt-out that if they do really well during the year, they don't have to take their final. I'm not sure I understand why that is, but I guess the assumption is that everyone's learned what they need to learn. But think of yourself, if you're taking a test, if you're preparing for a test, and it's your average test, it's normal, you're nervous, you want to do well, and so you study hard, you focus in, you're worried about your grade. That's good stress. You need that. Now, let's say it's the end of the year and you don't really have to take it, but oh yeah, I guess I'll take it anyways just for fun. You have almost no motivation to do that, right? You don't really care. I don't have to study. It doesn't really matter. You're not going to be up for that at all. Now imagine the other extreme, that this test is the final test that you have to take for your schooling. And if you don't pass this test, if you don't get at least an 85 on this test, you are going to fail that class and you are going to not graduate. Think about how much pressure that puts on. You're going to study, but you may have so much stress in that you'll kind of cripple yourself, become overwhelmed, and not perform well. So there's this curvilinear relationship where there's this zone of good amount of stress. So if you think that you're trying to eradicate stress from your life, that's not really a realistic view. Harnessing the energy that comes from that and using it for good is such a wonderful way to go through life, with recognition that stress happens, loss happens, challenges happen, difficulties happen. And our job is to try to cope with those things. Okay, questions so far? Anything I'm Missing, people disagreeing with. Let me check the, okay. All right, looks like the chat is clear so far. Please feel free to put questions or comments, disagreements, anything that you want in there. So let's talk about post-traumatic stress. And what exactly is it? Is this a moment in time that as a society collectively and as a world that we're setting up for post-traumatic stress? PTSD is a reaction that all of us have the potential to have. The hallmark symptom is that you experience an event that's beyond the range of normal human experience, right? You experience an event that's beyond the range of normal human experience. And in that experience, and I think this pandemic certainly fits into that, there are behavioral, psychological, mood, and sleep changes that can happen. Agitation, irritability, hostility, hypervigilance, which is being oversensitive to your surroundings, maybe self-destructive behavior, maybe social isolation. The psychological symptoms are flashbacks and fear, anxiety, mistrust of people and of institutions. The mood, this kind of loss of interest and pleasure, feeling guilty, feeling lonely, and sleep disturbance, insomnia or nightmares. Think about yourself. I wonder if there are some of these kind of things that we're experiencing, right? The anxiety, the mistrust. There's a societal mistrust right now of institutions and governments and each other. Maybe a sense of guilt, certainly of loneliness. A lot of my seniors are really struggling. And not just seniors, but people that I know. How many people have you talked to? I miss seeing you. I wish we could get together. Is there a way to do this in a safe way? I miss my family and my friends. Excuse me. And those, Saturday afternoons when we would just get together and have a drink or have some food or cook out, and doing those things are very challenging right now and anxiety provoking. So the literature on post-traumatic stress talks about the conclusions that we come to, all right? We often come to conclusions, or what we call stuck points, that lead the way we think about ourselves. We develop these core beliefs about ourselves and about the world around us. And if we're going to have a growth mindset, we need to pay very close attention to our thinking, to our reactions, to the way we're coping. So let's talk about the ABC model. If anyone studied cognitive behavioral therapy at all, you know this ABC model. I guess maybe it would have helped if I would have put slides up, but I think I can describe this in a way that you can kind of visually, conceptually see this. So if you picture a big A leading to a B, leading to a C, that's the model, an arrow from the A to the B and from the B to the C. The A is the activating event or antecedent event. It's the thing that happens. So a thing happens and there's some sort of consequence, right? There's a big arrow from the A to the C. There's a consequence or a reaction. And typically it's our belief that fuels and runs the whole thing. So let me give you an example. You're driving along, minding your own business, just trying to get to work or to the store, and someone cuts you off in traffic. I know this has never happened to any of you, and if it did, I'm sure you responded beautifully. But let's say some person cuts you off in traffic, and the thoughts that go through our head, what a jerk. You could have killed me. I'll show you. And the feelings are anger and disgust and impatience. right? So the event happens, the jerk cuts you off, you start thinking all these really bad things, hateful, negative things. What an idiot, horrible human being. You feel anger, disgust, and impatience. So what's your behavior? What do? You cut them off, or you flip them off, or you drive up real close and you tailgate. You yell, you grip the steering wheel. I will, and then the consequence is that maybe you get in a wreck, or your blood pressure spikes. Maybe you're angry when you get home and you're grouchy and you're not nice to your family. Or maybe you get injured because you were tailgating so much that person slammed their brakes on, you got in an accident, and you banged your head on the windshield. This stuff really happens. There was a real story. There was someone half a mile from my house that he was a very angry driver, cut in front of me, cut me off. I flashed my lights at him, like, relax. He stopped his car, got out of the car, and started screaming and swearing and hollering until he finally got back in his car and he left, thank goodness. Right? But these are the things that happen. These are what we do. Now, notice the thought component of this. You're a jerk. You could have killed me. I'll show you. You blah, 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 blah. Leads to the cascade of all these consequences. Now, let's take an alternate scenario. You get cut off in traffic, and the thoughts go something like this. They didn't really realize they were cutting me off. Maybe they're in a hurry. There's someone that's hurt. They need to get to them. They're in trouble because they're late for work. They're going to get fired if they're not there in time. You know, I've cut people off before too. I'm not perfect either. Maybe it was an accident. They didn't really mean to do it. What do you think the feelings are with that? They're much more mellow, aren't they? There's maybe some patience, some compassion. There's still anger, like I almost got in an accident. It's a real feeling, but maybe there's more gratefulness that we didn't get in an accident. And so the behavior that follows that is to back off, slow down. Maybe you turn up the radio and you keep singing along with that goofy song that you were singing with. And so the consequence is you make it home safely. Maybe you're happy to see your family, you're more excited, you're not injured, and life goes on. So that's the ABCs. Pay attention to your ABCs. I get upset in traffic. This is a perfect example for me because it bothers me, and then I harbor that, and I actively work on slowing down, driving a little bit slower, counting when I'm sitting at a red light instead of I'm in a hurry, I got to get somewhere, I'm really impatient. I actively slow that down and I'll count. And most lights don't last more than 30 seconds, and that's a really long light. Okay, so notice your ABCs, and that leads us to this basic this basic construct of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is something called a 7-column worksheet. So what happens, especially if we go through a trauma, is that we develop, not just kind of in the car example of being cut off, but we develop these deeper kind of stuck points, right? The car example is a quick reaction, and we can kind of decide more quickly what it is that we think, and which changes our reaction and our behavior. When we've gone through a trauma, especially a prolonged trauma, we tend to develop more well-ingrained thoughts and beliefs, and they're so deeply ingrained that they're automatic. We don't even realize them anymore. And so in the trauma literature, we call these things stuck points, right? These are things that we've over-accommodated to, that we've taken in and we believe, and we start running our life around these beliefs. Some trauma-based thoughts may be stuck points, might be, I can't trust anyone. And we certainly see a lot of that in society right now. Isolation helps my post-traumatic stress. This is maybe a conclusion, I have to stay away from everybody. It's my only safe place. Mistakes are intolerable and cause serious harm or death. So I cannot make a single mistake. I can't ever forget to wash my hands. I must always do everything perfectly. I can't touch my eyes or my nose ever. These are things we're being told. Now, they're healthy things, but these can also be stuck points when we're so caught up in always and must and never. There's nothing I can do to protect myself, right? This feeling of helplessness and powerlessness. I must be in control to be safe. Is anyone feeling this one? I must be in control to be safe of my home, of my environment, of my family, of everything. And if anyone's doing, there's all these things that are outside of my control, and we're grasping, trying to desperately control all these things that we don't have control over. It may affect intimacy. It's dangerous to be connected with other people. Esteem. I deserve to feel bad about this, right? Maybe I'm being punished for things. And another one is if I'm happy, I'm not honoring the suffering of so many other people, right? Kind of limiting yourself from enjoying the moment, from having a great conversation or finding a creative way to do something or taking a nice walk. You kind of feel like maybe you have to punish yourself because you need to honor the suffering of so many other people. So there's this thing called a 7-column worksheet. And I would just want to go through an example of how to work through that worksheet. All right. Good. Just looking, any questions or comments? Again, please feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to derail this a little bit if you have a comment or a question that you want me to address. Okay. So on this 7-column worksheet, the first part of this is the event or the thing that happens. The second is our emotional reaction. The third is our stuck points. The fourth is coming up with evidence that supports the thought. The fifth is evidence that does not support the thought. The sixth is an alternate thought. And then the last part of this flow sheet or this model is re-rating your emotion or your feeling. So let's go through this as an example. So the event that happens is a pandemic hits and work as we know it is shut down. So the feeling, right, the natural feeling might be fearful, uncertain, annoyed, afraid. And if you can remember when this all started, maybe you were at like an 80 out of 100 on a 1 to 100 scale, 1 to 100 scale, a pretty strong initial emotional reaction, being afraid, being annoyed. All this uncertainty has a really powerful impact. And so this internal sense of emotional reaction is at 80 out of 100. And then we start to look at what are some of the possible stuck points or thoughts, right? These, there's literally a list of these limited thinking patterns that we all do. And so I want to read through this list of these patterns, and I want you to think about for yourself if you do any of these things. The first one is mental filtering. Mental filtering. You only look at one part of a situation and you reinforce, you filter through this negative filter. Magnifying or minimizing. Us as human beings love to magnify the negative and minimize the positive. We blow something completely out of proportion or we ignore something that's been really good. All or nothing thinking. We interpret situations as either one extreme or in the other with no shades of gray. I've either gotten 100% on all my exams and I'm a perfect student, or I'm an abject failure. Generalizing. We make broad conclusions based on very minimal evidence. So we're very good at this. Because I missed one fly ball that was hit to me on the softball field, I had a horrible game and I was a complete failure. Catastrophizing. You can see there's a lot of overlap. Always believing that the very worst thing will happen. Personalizing. Believing a situation is always about you. We like to take things very personally. Mind reading, we believe that we know the intentions of others, that we guess. We're especially good at this in our long-term relationships. I'm convinced I know what my wife is thinking before she even thinks it. I know her so well. I know. And these aren't always like loving, positive things, like assuming ill will or mind reading that I know what she's thinking. Shoulds, musts, oughts, and what ifs. We like to come up with all of these rigid rules. I should always be perfect. I must never make a mistake. These things get us in trouble. And emotional reasoning. Because I feel something, it must be true, right? Because I feel ashamed about something, then it must have been awful. Because I feel that someone was being offensive to me, it must be crushing to my ego. So these are the types of cognitive distortions that we do, or stuck point thinking that we do. So let's talk about our example. The pandemic is hit. We're feeling uncertain, annoyed, and afraid at an 80 out of 100. And we develop these stuck point thoughts. Maybe the hospital will never figure this out, right? That's magnifying the negative. We're all going to get laid off and the economy is going to be decimated. Right? Anyone had these kind of thoughts? Like, this world is going to tank as we know it, and life as we know it is going to be over. These are generalizing and catastrophizing. Every single person on the planet is going to get infected. I've heard people say this. Well, we're all going to get it eventually. So this is all or nothing kind of thing. This is a reality one thing. In my house, we never should have ripped out our kitchen 2 weeks before this pandemic started. It's a true story. I ripped all the cabinets. I took everything down to nothing. We had a microwave and a toaster oven for about 3 months in this pandemic because everything shut down. We couldn't get to anything. So those are shoulds and what ifs. How was I supposed to know? I will never be able to go to the bathroom because people are stupid and they're buying all the toilet paper. Right? That's personalizing. I guess now it's about Lysol. Has anyone tried to buy Lysol spray? You cannot find it anywhere. And so maybe a summary stuck point is that things will never get better. Things will never get better. So if we're going to look at this from a CBT perspective, what evidence do I have to suggest that this is actually true? The truth is there is a great deal of uncertainty. The virus is highly contagious, and it does spread quickly, and there is no cure or vaccine. Right? This is true. We're not making this up. And I can't control the virus. I can't control other people. I really can't control the economy. So there is some evidence to suggest that that this is an uncertain and fearful situation. Then we step back and say, what evidence do I have that this does not support the thought? What evidence do I have that this is maybe not true, these catastrophic thinking, that things will never get better? Well, we went through some of it at the very beginning. Pandemics throughout history have resolved. Scientists are working extremely hard to figure this out. My family is together and we're all supporting each other. I have incredible confidence in the people that I work with. At the hospital, we recreated the entire way we care for our patients in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. And we set up a special call-in COVID line that we all staffed, all the behavioral folks staffed, to help kind of soothe the souls of folks that were calling in that were anxious about COVID. And we set up a pretty simple mechanism where they could get to us almost immediately. which we did not have immediate access to behavioral health services. Anyone who knows who's tried to access services themselves or tried to access services for someone they love or one of their patients or residents, how difficult it is. You can wait months to get in. We took all of that away, and within an hour, and often within 10 to 15 minutes, we were on the line with someone providing care that they need. That never would have happened. Never would have happened without this situation. So there's evidence that supports the kind of catastrophic thinking that this is a difficult and challenging and potentially life-threatening situation. There's also a lot of evidence to suggest that the catastrophic view of this is not true. So what's the alternate thought? What's an alternate thought that helps kind of soothe the soul? I can be patient, I can be diligent, I can lean on the people that I love and trust, and I can minimize the risk. We can support each other no matter what. Right? That's a balanced kind of thought. Maybe another one would be, it's understandable that I'm concerned about the situation, and I understand that all that worry is not really an effective way to respond. It's not helping me. One of the things we talk about in cognitive behavioral therapy is that worrying is kind of like superstition. Right? It's an interesting thing that we do. We kind of torture ourselves. A parental example is that if the 16-year-old just got their license and is driving the car for the first time, the parents believe that if they stay up all night and they worry enough, somehow that will put a cloak of safety around their child and they will not get in the accident. Right? It's kind of, when you think about it, it's sort of superstitious and kind of unproductive. But we believe, we have this almost superstitious belief that that worrying helps the situation, right? It's trying to help us. It really is. Worrying about Lysol wipes and having enough toilet paper and about washing your hands, there's some productive part of that. But remember our curvilinear relationship. At some point, it's crippling and unproductive. No stress at all, well, then you're out there without a mask and you're out there just being in large groups of people, gathering in mass, talking, eating, coughing on each other, right? If you have no stress and no worry at all, that's one extreme. This is nothing, this is no problem, this is not a real issue. Then you don't feel stress, you don't protect yourself. On the other hand, if you're so crippled, you can't get out of your house, you can't go for a walk, you can't enjoy your life, that's not productive either. Right? I don't want to belabor the point, but hopefully that gives you some perspective. Our goal is kind of like a big teeter-totter to try to balance out our thinking. Okay, questions, thoughts, comments at all? I don't see any questions yet. Hopefully you guys are still there and still with me. Maybe you need to stand up and take a break, take an extra sip of coffee. All right, we have about maybe 10 to 15 minutes left. So if we go through that whole process of our initial reaction to this pandemic, of feeling afraid at an 80 out of 100, and then we go through our process of challenging these thoughts back and forth, literally writing down the list of what evidence do I have for this, what evidence is against it, then you come back and kind of re-rate. How worried and overwhelmed am I? What would I rate my emotion now when I look at it as a reasonable amount of hypervigilance is needed, caution is needed? At the same time, there are lots of reasons why I can feel free and open to live my life. At that point, I re-rate myself at maybe a 25 out of 100, and I'm worried, but I'm comforted. Right? Worried, but comforted. Balance. Remember, we're not trying to live a stress-free life. That's not reality. So pay attention to your stuck point thinking. Learn to know yourself really well. Am I someone who's all completely all or nothing thinking? Do I catastrophize a lot? Do I take things really personally? Am I using the word should and must and ought a lot? Right? Kind of pay attention to your thinking and get to know yourself really well. This is a lovely exercise, even outside of a pandemic, to know your hot buttons, to know your automatic ways of thinking, and try to soften that view of yourself and the world around you a bit. That's what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. And really, if you think about it, that's what kind of healthy psychological functioning is about as well, having resilience and having an ability to put things in context. So there's this idea, this thing called post-traumatic growth, right? There's a whole literature on this. After a hurricane, after a flood, after a tornado, after being in war or in a sexual or being sexually assaulted, after a health crisis or a pandemic, right? Things happen to people in this life. And there's this idea and literature that there may be growth, that these are opportunities for growth. Now, this is not to minimize the challenge and the difficulty. And this is a gradual process, right? You can't just talk somebody out of really quickly. Oh, I know you were in war and you saw people die and things were blowing up around you, and just kind of shake off. What are you learning? What are you growing from this? No, it's not that, right? You can't kind of rush that process. But anyone who's been through a challenge or a difficult time in their life, they know very well that there's this perspective that can change, right? Talk to people who've survived cancer. If anyone in our group has survived cancer and gone through all those treatments, and they come out with this perspective, this appreciation for life, for love, for relationships, right? Maybe a different view of their existential meaning and purpose in this life. There's the possibility of growth through trauma, of growth through trials and tribulations. So I guess the question is there some form of transformative power of suffering? Right? This has been, if you're a student of history, a student of religions and philosophy, this idea of the transformative power of suffering is a foundational part, right, of many philosophies and religion. The human condition includes fragility. And if you think about it, that's what makes life so precious, right? That's the beauty of it, that we're fragile, that we're human, that we have a limited amount of time on this planet, that we're emotional, that we feel things, that we love, and we can get hurt and we get sad and we miss people when they're not here. But we also have all of these other range of emotions of being able to experience happiness and joy and elation, that our concern and compassion for others drives us towards doing all sorts of things, right? So the idea of growth through challenge and through suffering is a fundamental part of what we're all kind of here to do, right? That's what we hope we pass on to the next generation, is some idea of how to be resilient, to handle challenges and difficulties. And the post-traumatic growth literature talks about these 5 areas: an appreciation for life, deepening relationships with others, having new possibilities in this life, understanding your own personal strength, and this idea of existential growth, of meaning, a deep idea of meaning, and growing appreciation for life and the limited amount of time that we do have. Okay, so I don't know if you guys have seen this. There's a schematic. Sorry. Yes, I'm happy to send handouts. I have some graphs. I have the worksheets. If you want me to put that together, I'm happy to share that. Okay. So there's this, who do I want to be during COVID-19? I don't know if you've seen this with 3 concentric expanding circles with a fear zone, a learning zone, and a growth zone. I really like this idea. It kind of fits with this idea of post-traumatic growth. That initial reaction in the fear zone, who do I want to be? Am I the person who's hoarding food, hoarding toilet paper, and Lysol? I'm very upset with that person who's hoarding all the Lysol. I just want a can of Lysol, really, please. Are you the person who's complaining all the time? Do I want to be the person who immediately forwards all these messages to other people with unsubstantiated information? Do I want to share and transmit my fear and anxiety to others around me? I'm not so sure I want to be that person, and if I'm being that person, I want someone to say something and for me to catch myself. The fear is completely understandable. At the same time, I'm not so sure that's healthy for you and the other people around you to be stuck in that fear zone. Then the next zone is this learning zone, right? You know what? I'm going to stop compulsively consuming things that harm me, like just eating all the cake and cookies and barbecue potato chips I can find. I'm going to stop just blindly consuming all of this news. I'm going to shut some of it off. And I'm going to start letting go of some things that are outside of my control. I'm going to learn to identify my emotions. I'm going to be aware of the situation, and I'm going to think of the best ways to act. I'm going to be thoughtful and try to be reasonable. I'm going to verify information before I share it. Please verify information before you share it. And I'm going to acknowledge that everyone is trying to cope with this. For the most part, people are trying to do their best, having some compassion. That's that learning zone, right? Being aware of yourself and your surroundings and trying to accurately get as much information as you can. And then there's this growth zone, right? Do I want to be in this growth zone? Is that who I want to be? Do I want to find a purpose? Find ways that I can help others? I'm going to use my skills to service others. I'm going to show empathy to myself and to other people. Going to try to focus on living in the present and enjoying the moment. There are lots of moments to enjoy here. Lots of moments. How many people have said, you know what, it's really nice not to have to drive that long commute to work. I mean, in Maryland, it's probably worse than Ohio. Some of those commutes, an hour, 2 hours each way to get to where you're going, not having that commute, being able to spend more time with family, playing games with children that you haven't done in a long time, going outside and exploring nature. I did not know there were such a diverse set of metro parks around the Cleveland area. That's where I'm at. There are rock formations and lakes and rivers and hiking, miles and miles and miles of beautiful trails. I'm going to focus on this present, on these moments of spending that time, keeping myself emotionally happy and transmitting that hope. Do I want to show gratitude? Do I want to be someone who can adapt to change and embrace change? Can I practice calmness and patience and creativity? So think about which zone you're in and which zone you want to be in. Let's go through I want to leave at least a few minutes for questions if people have them. So here are the take-home points. Hopefully this has been something where you're able to take a step back and think about the way you're coping, and hopefully this has been helpful. So here are some take-home points. Number one, a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. What do you have an abundance of? Love, compassion, kindness, grace, dignity, helpfulness. We have an abundance of these things. These are truly what makes life meaningful. There's not a scarcity. When we get into that scarcity mindset, then we start getting angry with people and hoarding and all the rest of it. There is abundance around us. Take home point number two, how are you growing? Are you facing challenges? Are you being creative? Are you focusing on what's important? How are you growing as a person, as a professional, as a parent, as a child, as a sibling? How are you growing? Number three, your body holds trauma and anxiety, right? We physically feel it. Burn it off. Stay active. Get out of bed. Get out of the house. Breathe fresh air. do things to burn off that physical energy in our body. Number 4, the simple things. Everyone says it. Enjoy the simple things in life. A beautiful sunset, a walk outside in the woods, the joy of watching your children learn something, right? The simple things. Everyone says it. This is actually the time to live it. Pay attention to your balanced thinking that we spent so much time talking about. Look out for those stuck points and try to do your teeter-totter. When you feel like you're getting really dragged down to one side, especially if it's negative, try to balance it out. Number 6, who are you helping? Being strong for others is actually a way to learn your own strength, right? People learn when they're taking care of other people and they have to be strong even when they're feeling weak. They find their growth, they find their resilience and strength. Who are you helping? Step out yourself and be kind to others. Get facts from reliable sources. Number 7, please minimize the news watching and the social media. I have a fun game for you. We went through those limited thinking patterns. Try to identify how many of those patterns are happening on social media. All of the catastrophizing and the all or nothing thinking and the mind reading and the personalization, magnifying, it's all happening. It's fascinating if you step back and try to look at it in an objective way. And try to get your facts from reliable sources. We need to be informed, but make sure it's good information. Number 8, it's okay to feel afraid and uncertain. This is a normal human emotion. Embrace it, grow through it, listen to it. It's a real part of our humanity. Number 9, in the end, we all have a choice. We choose our focus. We choose how we use our energy. We choose how we use our time. Choose wisely. Choose to be more of the hero of your story. Trust your wisdom. Be patient. Be supportive. Be kind to yourself and others, and uncertainty will become much more manageable. And then number 10, the last one, is don't be alone. Connect with others. The number one thing that research shows over and over about psychological and mental health is social support. Be with people you love. All right, so the last thing is just an Emily Dickinson quote before we go into any questions. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Emily Dickinson. All right, I will stop there. Those are my comments. Questions or comments that you have? We have a few minutes left.
Dr. Berko, thank you so very much. What a wonderful way to spend an hour. And I know I feel like I was able to take a step back, and so much of what you shared really resonated. And I think it'll be really helpful for folks on the line. We'd love to have some questions or comments or discussion. Any thoughts from those on the line? You can enter things into the chat, or you can unmute and just speak up that way as well. Karen says, thank you, Dr. Berko. Great information and great takeaways. Yes, Kathy, we will send handouts. I'll connect with Dr. Berko after this, and we'll figure out what would be most helpful to share. Dr. Berko, something that you said, I was wondering if you could talk a bit more. So number 6 of your take-home tips, you said, who are you helping? And that we can learn a lot about our own strength by taking care of other people. Can you talk for a moment about those of us, especially in this field, that our career is caring for other people, and that can sometimes feel heavy and overwhelming and make us feel burned out? Can you talk about how to kind of balance that dynamic in all of this as well?
Yeah, that's such a great question. We didn't talk about burnout very much. Everyone in the helping professions right now is feeling some sense of crispiness and burnout between trying to adjust everything about the way we're doing, right? Practicing about keeping people safe and setting up rules and regulations in our buildings and in our medical practices. So there is that burnout of giving, giving, giving. So I'm really glad you're asking that question, because there's another part of this, which is the self-care. And it's not selfish to take that couple hours and go for the walk. It's not selfish to kind of lock yourself in with your loved one and turn the phone off and take a few minutes, take a little bit of time just to hang out with them, to binge watch a show, or to hug and kiss, or just hang out. Those are really wonderful things. You know, there is a balance, and people, you know, like to talk about that whole, you know, self-care. You have to put your own mask on before you put on the mask, help other people around you. Things like music, things like nature, um, and things like literature. And for me, studying history and putting things into context are a place that kind of fills me up with a sense of gratitude for what I have, and for what I'm going through. So I guess the self-care literature would be that it's not selfish to take that time and to set limits. It's okay to do that, and we have to do that right now, so that we're available, emotionally available, to take care of others. When you're resentful and snippy and angry and burned out with trying to take care of everybody else, that's your sign. You need a moment to do something nice for yourself.
Thanks for addressing that. That's really helpful. Another question that folks have asked is resources or book recommendations that you might have. Are there things that come to mind that you might suggest to folks during this time?
Yeah, I can put a brief little bibliography. There's a workbook that might, if you really want to dive into this conceptual model and with really practical ways to do this, there's a thoughts and feelings workbook that describes all of this CBT stuff, where you can dive in and do thought records, and you can check yourself around anxiety and panic and worry. It gives this really nice resource for yourself, and explained in simple ways that you can even print these out, cut them out, and give them to some of your residents as skill books as well, as a way to practice. It's called the Thoughts and Feelings Workbook, and I can send that reference, include that in what we send out.
That sounds great. I think that was another one of my questions, is recommendations for folks who are on the line, you know, practical ways that they can share this learning with their teams and with their residents. And so that's a great suggestion to maybe take some ideas from that workbook. But any other practical thoughts on how folks can kind of spread this knowledge to their teams?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of leading by example. If you're the leader in the room, people are looking to you. They're looking at your knowledge about the situation. They're looking at your thoughtfulness. Have you thought through the details of how to handle things? Are you emotionally kind of balanced and regulated? Are you snippy and angry and ordering people around, or are you collaborating and cooperative? The very best way to teach this to other people is to show them, right? Here's what we do under stress, grace under pressure. I guess at the most simple level, that would be my advice, is to check yourself into what you're showing. Just like with children, they listen to very little that we actually say, but they watch almost everything we do. And so I would watch the things you do and the way you handle yourself, and teach people through example of how to handle this situation and how to be gracious and kind to others.
That's a really good reminder. Thank you so much, Dr. Berko. I know that we are a bit over time, but I would love to do kind of a, it looks like we have a question here, Dr. Berko. Someone's asking if they can share your 10 points if they credit you.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's wonderful. Thanks for asking, Kathy. I would love to hear from those who are on the line. If you can type into the chat your kind of number one takeaway from this. What's your one thing that you are going to take with you as you go to your next meeting today, or you go to your next conversation? What was the one point that really stood out to you that you are going to apply immediately? Any thoughts? Yeah, the cognitive distortions piece, that was really helpful, Dr. Berko, for you to spell those out. And my goodness, I was like, wow, I do a lot of these things. And I think especially during this time with so much uncertainty, it's easy to fall into that.
Yeah, we all do them.
We do.
Yes, we do.
The history lesson gives great perspective. Yeah, that was fantastic to kind of think through. This is not the first time that society has grappled with a challenge like this. And for you to point out that we have seen incredible advancements even with all of these, other pandemics and things that our society has been through, it really was a great perspective and something I'd not thought about. So Karen, thanks for calling that out. Yeah, Kathy says, identify opportunities for gratitude. Dr. Berko, I loved how you talked about that abundance versus scarcity mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so easy to forget that.
It is. It certainly is, especially when all we're thinking about these days is the lack of Clorox. So.
Yeah, I want that guy's garage with all those Clorox wipes and the Lysol. Someone's hoarding it.
Somebody's hoarding it. You know what, though, Dr. Berko, I haven't heard of any shortages of Reese's, so that is at least something we can focus on as there's an abundance of that.
Okay. Well, thank you. See, now you're helping me, Allison. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you all so very much, Dr. Berko. I cannot thank you enough for doing this with us today and for facilitating these really important conversations. Thank you to those who asked questions and contributed. And Dr. Berko and I will connect and talk about how to best get you some handouts and follow-up information. Dr. Berko, any closing thoughts?
Be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And thank you for spending some time with me this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you so very much. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and we will be in touch.
All right, bye-bye.